If you drive south of Los Angeles onto the Palos Verdes Peninsula, you will pass a neighborhood of clifftop homes that breaks a rule most people never think about. Homes here sell for $1 million, $5 million, and the best for more than $20 million. They have some of the finest ocean views in California. But the ground they stand on will not hold still. It is moving downhill, toward the water, up to a foot in 1 week. This is the story of a wealthy neighborhood sliding into the sea, and why this time, the money cannot make it stop. This is the Palos Verdes Peninsula, a green hump of cliffs about 25 miles south of downtown Los Angeles, and one of the wealthiest, quietest corners of Southern California. There is a Trump golf course out on the bluff. In the enclave around a stretch of coast called Portuguese Bend, homes run from under $1 million up to more than $20 million for a 7-bedroom estate on the water. People did not buy up here for square footage. They bought the light, the quiet, and the feeling that they had found a piece of coastline that would always be exactly where they left it. And the strange part is that the danger was never really a secret. Geologists had warned for decades that this ground was unstable, that it had moved before and would almost certainly move again. The maps existed. The history was on record. And still, lot by lot and permit by permit, the hillside filled with expensive homes because the view sold and nobody wanted to be the person who called paradise unsafe. But what makes this neighborhood remarkable is not the price. It is the ground. The whole peninsula is, in a geological sense, one enormous old landslide. Thousands of years ago, the south side of this land slid toward the sea, then went still, and stayed still long enough for everyone to forget it had ever moved. Underneath the pretty hillside sits a layer that most homeowners never think about. It is a soft, ancient clay, and one of its main ingredients is a mineral called bentonite. When that clay is dry, it holds firm. When it fills with water, it turns slick, almost like a wet bar of soap, and anything resting on top of it begins to slide. So here's the difference that almost nobody thinks about when they buy the view. Everywhere else, a house sits on solid ground. Here, the ground itself is the thing that moves. For a long time, though, it did not. Then, in 1956, crews grading the hillside to push a new road through cut into the slope and woke the old landslide up. It has never really gone back to sleep since. For decades, it crept along an inch or two a year, slow enough that people built on it and sold on it and lived on it, treating the cracked driveways and the crooked floors as the strange price of paradise. In the 1970s, a burst of movement destroyed a visitor center near the water, and then the land went quiet again, and the memory faded, and the building went on. Geologists today have a blunt name for what sits under Portuguese Bend. They call it the largest and fastest moving landslide in the United States. And this is not a new fear here. It has happened before, in the most public way imaginable. Just down the coast sits a golf course now known as Trump National. Back in 1999, when it was still being built under a different owner, the ground gave way. On a single day in June, roughly 17 acres let go, and about 1,000 feet of the 18th fairway slid straight into the Pacific Ocean. The cause was the same ancient clay, saturated with water, doing exactly what it does. The original developer went bankrupt. Donald Trump bought the wrecked course cheap for around $27 million, then spent tens of millions more stabilizing the ground and building one of the tallest reinforced walls of its kind in North America to hold the hillside in place. A mile away, a road sign still warns drivers, in plain letters, of constant land movement. Then came the water. Southern California is mostly dry, sometimes for years at a stretch. But in the winters of 2023 and 2024, storm after storm rolled in off the Pacific. Two of the wettest seasons in memory dumped an enormous amount of rain onto the peninsula, and all of that water soaked down into the ground and found those ancient clay layers waiting for it. Part of what made those winters so punishing was the way the rain arrived. Long trains of storms called atmospheric rivers parked over California and emptied out. In August of 2023, a rare tropical storm named Hillary pushed all the way into Southern California and dropped months of rain across a single weekend. This time, the landslide did not creep. It lurched. In the whole of 2021, the land under one part of Portuguese Bend had moved a grand total of about 3 inches. In the spring of 2024, it was moving at a pace that worked out to roughly 30 feet in a single year. When the governor of California signed an emergency declaration for the area, the document described the ground sliding at an average of 9 to 12 inches every week, not a year. A week? You could stand in one of these yards, come back 7 days later, and the whole hillside would have shifted the length of your arm toward the ocean. What was moving was not just the surface. Underneath the streets, an entire slab of earth, hundreds of feet across, was sliding downhill as one connected mass. The houses, the roads, the water pipes, the power poles, all of it riding slowly seaward on that wet layer of clay, like a deck of cards sliding off a tilted table. There was no single dramatic collapse. The whole neighborhood was simply being carried, a little more each week, toward the water. You can see what that does to a building. Just above the water sat a small, world-famous church called the Wayfarers Chapel, a structure of glass and redwood designed in 1951 by Lloyd Wright, the son of Frank Lloyd Wright. People called it the Glass Church. It was considered so beautiful and so important that in 2023, it was declared a National Historic Landmark. A few months after that honor, the moving ground reached it. The glass panels cracked and then shattered. The steel frame twisted and bent out of shape. The concrete floor split apart, and the cornerstone that had been laid in 1949 cracked straight through. To save it at all, the congregation did the only thing left to do. They took the entire chapel apart, panel by panel and beam by beam, and put the pieces into storage, hoping to rebuild it one day on stable ground somewhere else. If a landmark built of glass and steel could be pulled apart like that, the ordinary homes never had a chance. Water mains buried under the streets began snapping, sometimes several of them in a single week. The main road along this stretch of coast, Palos Verdes Drive South, buckled and cracked and had to be patched again and again as the ground carried it sideways underneath the asphalt. It was also the lifeline, the one real way in and out along that stretch of coast, and keeping it drivable became a permanent, expensive fight against a surface that would not stay flat. Residents watched their houses slowly go out of square, doors that would not close, tiles popping off walls, pools cracking and draining into the dirt. One man took to checking his own house with a laser level once a month, just to measure how far it had tilted. He described what he was living through as a slow-motion train wreck. Then the disaster stopped being slow at all. By the summer of 2024, the shifting ground was tearing directly at the pipes and wires buried beneath the neighborhood. In late July, the gas company decided the risk was too high and shut off natural gas to about 135 homes in Portuguese Bend. A few weeks later, on a hot day at the end of August, the moving land damaged a power line on the hillside and sparked a small brush fire. That was the moment the electricity stopped being a service and became a threat. On the 1st of September, Southern California Edison cut the power to 140 homes and more than 50 businesses in Portuguese Bend, and told residents the shutoff was indefinite, with no promised date to turn it back on. The very next day, the utility cut power to more than 100 additional homes in a neighboring community called Seaview. In the span of about 2 days, roughly 245 homes went dark in one of the wealthiest suburbs of Los Angeles, with the summer heat still climbing and no power to run so much as a fan. The city issued evacuation warnings and told people to pack their documents and their medications and be ready to leave. Some bought generators and dug in. Others gave up and left. Law enforcement began flying drones over the darkened streets at night, watching for looters picking through the empty houses. And the governor declared a state of emergency. And the word that kept coming up was indefinite. This was not a storm outage that flips back on in a day. For the hardest-hit homes, the utilities were simply gone, with no plan and no timeline to bring them back. A multi-million-dollar house with no power, no gas, and no reliable water is, in every way that matters, uninhabitable. Some of these homes were still standing, still beautiful, and already effectively condemned. By then, the problem had grown far past a few unlucky houses. The active landslide complex covered something like 240 acres, and by the end of that summer it was affecting an estimated 650 homes across several neighborhoods. This had gone from a handful of cliff-edge properties into an entire section of a city, schools and churches and country clubs included, all of it sitting on ground that simply would not stop moving. For the families who stayed, ordinary life became a kind of siege. Months without gas or electricity in a neighborhood of luxury homes. Refrigerators ran off rented generators, and water had to be trucked in whenever the mains broke. One longtime resident said the water main near his house ruptured so often that he once counted 4 separate breaks in a single week. People who had spent their careers earning their way onto this hill were now hauling water up the driveway and lying awake listening to their houses crack in the dark. Many of them had lived there for 30 or 40 years. They packed town halls demanding answers and help, and often walked out feeling that no one in charge fully grasped what was being lost. And a hard line began to open between the neighbors. The ones with money and somewhere else to go could cut their losses and leave. For the ones whose entire net worth was locked in the house, there was no real choice but to stay, run the generator, and watch the value of everything they owned slide away with the hill. And this is where the people of Portuguese Bend collided with the cruelest part of the whole story. When a fire or a storm destroys your home, insurance is supposed to catch you. But a standard homeowner's policy does not cover earth movement. It does not cover a landslide. A flood is a sudden event and a fire is a sudden event, and the industry has built products for both. The slow, grinding movement of the ground gets treated as something else, quietly excluded from nearly every ordinary policy. So as the moving hillside pulled these multi-million-dollar houses apart, most of the owners discovered they held nothing that would pay them a single dollar for it. The dramatic slope over the sea gave these homes their value and, at the very same time, carried the one hazard that almost no policy would cover. That left one way out. Sell the house, take the money, and go. But stop and think about who would ever buy it. Who signs up for a home that the government has cut the power and the gas to, that no insurer will touch, that sits on top of the fastest moving landslide in the country? And insurance was only half the wall. A house in a recognized landslide zone is almost impossible to finance the normal way, because no ordinary bank wants to write a 30-year mortgage on ground that might not be there in 30 years. That knocked out nearly every buyer who needed a loan, which is almost all of them, and left only people paying cash, who knew they were the only game in town and bid accordingly. The market for these houses did not just soften, it came apart. Listings piled up and sat there. Homes that had been worth several $1 million stayed unsold for months, then longer. One owner listed a home on Vanderlip Drive, openly advertising it at a fraction of its value from before the land began moving, all but begging for any buyer willing to gamble. And every lowball sale that closed became the new benchmark the next appraiser used, dragging the value of the next house in line down with it. Picture it. You own a beautiful home on a cliff above the Pacific. It is worth, or it was worth, $3 or $4 million, the reward for a lifetime of work. You cannot insure it against the one force that is destroying it. You cannot sell it for anything close to what you paid, if you can sell it at all. And the ground beneath your foundation is creeping toward the ocean by inches every single week on its own schedule, ignoring you completely. If you had that view, and you knew what the hill underneath it was doing, would you still have bought in? In the end, the only buyer left standing was the government itself. Federal and state agencies put together a voluntary buyout, around $42 million, to to purchase the worst-hit homes and let those owners walk away with something. But there was a catch in the fine print. The price would be based on what each home was worth back on the 1st of December, 2022, before the landslide accelerated and the values collapsed. And even at that frozen price, the grant would only cover part of the sale, leaving the owner to swallow the rest. For many, it was cold comfort. Some parcels simply sat with no offers at all, homes that no bank wanted to lend against and no family wanted to raise children on. A house can be a person's whole life savings. On this hill, for a growing number of people, that savings was now tied to a patch of earth that was quietly walking itself into the sea. So the city went after the water. They drilled deep wells into the hillside and ran pumps around the clock, essentially putting the whole neighborhood on a kind of dialysis, trying to outdrain the rain and keep the ancient clay dry enough to hold. And it worked, for a while. Through the second half of 2024, the movement eased, from around a foot a week down to roughly 8, and later, by some measurements from NASA satellites, down to about 4. The lurch slowed back into a crawl. But slowing down is not the same as stopping. The clay is still there. The peninsula is still, underneath everyone's kitchens and pools and riding trails, an ancient landslide that needs nothing more than the next few wet winters to wake up and speed off again. And everyone involved has someone to blame. The residents blame the city for ever letting them build here. The city points to the geology. The geologists say they warned everyone for 50 years. And through all of it, the ground just keeps moving, indifferent to the argument entirely. The question nobody down there can answer is what this hillside looks like in 30 years. What happens when the wells stop being enough, or the next run of wet winters arrives, or the buyout money runs dry, and the families still there are asked to fund the fight on their own? Nobody knows. And even now, with all of it plainly visible, signs near the coast still advertise brand new custom homes for sale, lots waiting for a buyer on the same slowly moving ground. For most of a century, the ocean was the entire reason to live up here. It was the asset, the view out every window, the thing that turned a house on a dry hillside into something worth millions. Now that same ocean is the direction everything is sliding, the reason the land underneath will not hold, the liability buried under every single deed on the street. You can pump the groundwater out for a season. You can patch the road, rebuild the chapel somewhere safer, and buy back a few dozen homes with federal money. You cannot talk an ancient landslide out of moving. The families up on that hill believed they had bought a piece of solid, permanent ground with the best view in California. It turned out the ground was the one thing that was never going to stay still. So here is the question worth arguing about. When a whole neighborhood is built on ground that geologists spent 50 years warning about, and it finally begins sliding into the sea, who should pay to save it? Should taxpayers keep funding the buyouts, and the wells, and the endless road repairs, year after year, to hold a hillside that may never truly stop moving? Or did these owners make their own choice the day they bought the most beautiful view in Los Angeles, on top of the fastest moving landslide in the country? Tell me where you land in the comments.